Thank you all in the midst of a really busy semester where we're doing our best to be on ground and virtual all at the same time. We're in week 10. I think we're 5 weeks away from making it to Thanksgiving and where you'll all earn a well-deserved 2-month rest-ish till we get back to full-time in late January of 2021. So thanks for all of your efforts thus far, and thank you for making the extra effort to continue to be a scholarly community and make time to get together during this speaker series. So before we get started with Malik Henfield today, I want to invite you to join us for our next lecture that we're really excited about. It'll be the November session. It'll be November 19th. Again, it will be on Zoom. We're really thrilled to welcome Constance Lindsay, an assistant professor in the University of North Carolina School of Education over at Chapel Hill. She'll be presenting on the topic of teacher diversity and student success, why racial representation matters in the classroom, and it's on the heels of a new book that she and two co-authors came out with that just landed a couple months ago. So we're really lucky to have Constance speak with us. She comes to us with expertise in education policy, teacher quality, out of school time, teacher diversity, learning gaps, and all sorts of things. So we really look forward to hosting her. But now, let me talk about today's talk. Today, the St. Louis University School of Education is really pleased to introduce Malik Henfield, who serves as full professor and the Dean of the School of Education at Loyola University in Chicago. Malik has earned a master's in education and an ed specialist degree in school counseling from the University of South Carolina, a Ph.D. in counselor education from The Ohio State University. As a counselor educator, Malik has a fundamental belief in mental health as a key component in meeting students' needs. And as a result, he's committed to diversifying the counseling profession and has consulted on these topics in school districts around the country. Over the years, Malik has been widely recognized for his achievements, winning awards from AERA, Chi Sigma Iota International Honor Society, and Phi Delta Kappa International Education Association. He was elected chair of AERA's largest special interest group, the Critical Examination of Race, Ethnicity, Class, and Gender in Education. He's published numerous scholarly articles, manuscripts, and books, and has delivered multiple keynote addresses. And his work, disseminated in these ways, has really focused on the experiences of Black students who have been formally identified as gifted and high achieving, and his most recent projects focus more on developing, implementing, and evaluating school interventions associated with developing Black students who are ready to succeed in college and beyond. Of course, today, as a new dean, Malik is able to spend much less energy on that research background and is now pouring himself into the leadership of the Loyola University School of Education. And this work, his work of the last 15 months, and really in the last 6 months, the focus of today's talk is titled, Centering Black Students' Needs, the Ups and Downs in the Life of a New Dean. Just so you know, this presentation will be recorded if you're asking questions or on screen so that we can share it down the road. In today's conversation, Malik will discuss what led him to hit send on a heartfelt email message to his faculty, staff, and students in response to the killing of George Floyd and several other Black men and women this spring. He will talk about the steps he has taken post that email to foster the growth of an anti-racist school of education at Loyola. And he will talk about some of the challenges he has faced in moving these initiatives forward as a new dean. That's a long-winded introduction. Malik has many, many accomplishments. We're thrilled that he's joining us today in the midst of wall-to-wall meetings, I'm sure. So please join me in welcoming Dean Malik Henfield. Malik.
Thanks for being here. It's my pleasure. Yeah, just difficult times for everyone involved, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I do mean a conversation. Please be clear that I'm hoping that no one's coming here expecting, your traditional, 45-minute lecture and then 15-minute Q&A. Because I'd really like to initially engage Dean Ritter in dialogue around this important issue topic and schools of education around the country as it relates specifically to our respective schools, and then move forward to opening it up and dialoguing with all of you as well. So again, happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right.
Where do we begin?
Well, I think you were you probably should start by introducing yourself and your sort of background, right? So we have context as how you came into this.
Sounds good. I born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Moved to South Carolina to escape the crazy 80s, so to speak, drugs and violence and so on and so forth. Only to find out that that was not the only place where that was happening. Moved to South Carolina, and there was a huge cultural clash between the New Yorker and the South Carolinians. Long story short, things didn't go as well, as smoothly as I would have hoped. Barely got out of high school. Finally got my act together and went off to college and had a little bit too much fun. I was on that 5.5-year plan instead of the 4 years, as I would have hoped. But when I got out, went into school counseling as a career path. A friend of mine was in a Master's of Education program at the University of South Carolina. And at the time I was working, and student loan payments came about. No one talked to me about that. I knew I'd have to pay them back at some point, but I didn't know when. And the person that I knew told me about deferrals to those payments and said that if you go into grad school, you could hold off on that. So I did. And he happened to be in school counseling. So I got into school counseling and loved it. Graduated, worked in a rural area for a year and some change. I was a single dad at the time, just wanted more. A friend of mine, one of my former professors, was at Ohio State, and I called him up, and he said that he told me how to get into a Ph.D. program, similar to my University of South Carolina experience. I gave that a shot and got in and packed the U-Haul up, my son and I, and we drove from South Carolina to Columbus, Ohio. No family, no friends, just the two of us. Difficult circumstances, as you can imagine, trying to balance grad school and single parenthood, and went to a conference, and someone saw me there who was a professor at the University of Iowa, tried to recruit me, did recruit me to come there under the guarantee that if I came during my dissertation year, if I graduated, I'd have to stay for a year at least. I did that, and 1 year turned to 10. So I was a tenured professor and program coordinator of school counseling program for a while, for 10 years at the University of Iowa. During that time, I met my now wife, then girlfriend, who was at Kellogg University in Chicago. It's a long way of saying why I'm here in Chicago, so forgive me. Who was in Kellogg at Chicago in a business school at Northwestern, and she lived in Rogers Park. So obviously I'm in Iowa, she's in Chicago. If someone was going to commute, it was not going to be her. So I was in Iowa Sunday through Wednesday, and I was on that Greyhound bus like clockwork every Wednesday, 4.5 hours to Chicago and 4.5 hours back on Sundays. And it was tough, being apart, because during that time we got married, and we decided that we should, finally be in the same place. And my in-laws were in the Bay Area, so I left my research one institution, University of Iowa, and went to the University of San Francisco. She got a job in tech, and I quickly followed at USF. And it was my first taste of Jesuit Catholic education, and I was sold. It was a better fit for me than the research one environment, where I felt like somewhat of an odd duck, who prioritized research, but I thought about it more in a nurturing way than the systems that were in place in that environment were set up to do. And not to suggest that anything was perfect at the USF, but it was just a better fit for the things that I envisioned for myself in my career. After about 2-3 years as a full associate and full professor there, I just wanted to do something else. And I told my dean, I'm bored. I want to try to run a center or something like that. And she said, okay, we can do that, but you have to be an associate dean. And you have to understand that was during the time when I represented the School of Education in contract negotiations against administration. So I'm anti-establishment, down with the man, power to the people, so on and so forth. So it was a struggle to even consider going over to the quote unquote dark side at that point in time. But I made the decision and tried to make the best of it. And it was a great experience. I learned how the sausage gets made, so to speak, and why my dean couldn't do the things that seemed so simple at the time when I was on the faculty. All of that became clear after 1 year. And during this time, we always knew that we would come back to Chicago. We just loved the city and the people. And once I turned my title from professor to associate dean on LinkedIn, the recruiters came from out of nowhere and they sent the position. And I wasn't drawn to Loyola, quite frankly. I was drawn to Chicago, and I had to wrap my head around what I could do as a dean. So I was already on the dark side. This was taking me into the abyss to go into deanship. So, but finally, I thought about, again, there's some good that I could do. And I wasn't really clear on what that was, but I thought that the higher I go up, so to speak, into administration, the more power and influence I could have. And do the right things with that power and influence. So we made the decision and came here at a really difficult time, quite frankly. 2017, we made Inside Higher Ed, a national publication focused on higher education, and not for good things. We had a vote of no confidence in the dean at that time. And in the 2 years since then, we had an interim dean who was actually a professor of physics, wasn't even in the field of education. So you can imagine there was a lot of, and there was just a huge exodus of faculty of color in particular from the School of Education. So it was just a really challenging time when I started back June 2019, 1 year and 4 months in. And we've just tried to do our best. And you can imagine also that how difficult it's been when you're first time dean, trying to wrap your head around what the job means. Oh, by the way, when I moved, my wife was 9 months pregnant at the time. I had to find a house in less than a week. And it was just a lot. It still is a lot going on. Finally thought we were getting our footing in January, started talking about strategic planning and so on and so forth. And then COVID hits. And here we are. And then George Floyd gets murdered. And then here we are at this point where we are right now, which is the topic of conversation, thinking about all of these different things that make me who I am, the situation that I walked into, and we're all together trying to navigate it, students, faculty, staff, and administration in a way that we all feel whole and respected, and feeling as though there's light at the end of the tunnel, which is very difficult, quite frankly, to see right now.
Thanks for that introduction, Malik. And just so you know, we have lots of students of higher ed in the room as well as faculty and staff. So, and Malik was very clear. He wants to make this a conversation. So please feel free to pop in audibly or type questions into the chat. I can monitor that while Malik is talking. So I'll keep my eye out for questions, and please don't be shy. We really intentionally set this up as not your standard PowerPoint presentation, and so please jump in. And while people are thinking about that, Malik, could you then talk about, you've led us right up to the spring and summer of 2020, where you're in your second year of well, actually you're in the spring, you're in your first year still. You're in the end of your first year as dean. You are with faculty and students who you've only known for 6-ish months, and in March were sent home. So now you get to know them virtually from your living room, and talk a bit about that spring and the email that you sent out to your faculty and your staff and your students, to your whole community.
Yeah, sure. So I probably was around faculty for about the full faculty. Okay, so let me back up. So I started in June. My start date was officially July 1st, but because my wife was 9 months, I said, it's probably a good idea for us to get out there and get settled. So I came in June, and it was a ghost town. Everyone's on 9-month contracts. So I don't really think about June and July and half of August. So really I was with the faculty, full faculty, August through that first semester. And then we came back in January. And then after that, it's been a ghost town again. Everyone's in their home. So I've been around the faculty out of the 16 months, total 4 months. And it's been difficult 4 or 5 months. And it's been difficult to, thinking about the situation that I walked into, the lack of trust in administration, given some of the things that have happened in the past, and just the turmoil that folks have been through, and still those who remain, they're still here. They're here, right? And the students are still here. Some of the students that we have experienced all of that, and trying desperately to figure out a way to understand who people are and have them understand me with no playbook, right? I forgot to mention there was an interim provost at the time. So, we met maybe 2 or 3 times that first 6 months. It was tough. And then I finally felt like, okay, I'm putting on the dean hat and I'm really starting to wear it well, right? We had an off-site retreat, hired an external consultant. The president came out and said a few words. We walked away and everyone's feeling good. And then COVID hits and it's just chaos on campus. No one really knows what's going on. What is this COVID thing? Is it really a thing? And should we have class? Should we not? So we just obviously just scrapped strategic planning and went into crisis mode. And that's where we were for the large part of the spring, if not the entire spring, just trying to figure out a path forward. And then obviously, because we're home, everyone's glued to the news every single day. And we see George Floyd on the ground with that officer's knee to his neck. And it's an image that I've seen still. I still haven't watched the video. I refuse to watch the video. I know what's on there. And there was no conversation happening on campus. And it was frustrating for me, quite frankly, because you have to understand, let's just back up to when I first started. And one of my first big meetings was, we had an open house for prospective students. And I was being introduced similar to what you did at the beginning of this call. And I was looking around the room, looking at the walls as they were introducing me. And when I got to the podium, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, man, there sure are a lot of white people on these walls. And you can imagine that's not what folks are accustomed to at Loyola Chicago. But that's who I am. I came from the Bay, and we wear our hearts on our sleeves, and it is what it is. And I thought, because that was a Jesuit institution, this is a Jesuit institution, I could just copy and paste that ethos in Chicago. And I quickly was reminded by some powers that be that, that's probably not the best impression that we want to give to students. And I started feeling a bit down, questioning, did I make a bad decision? Because I loved USF. I loved being on the West Coast. I loved everything about it, but I just loved Chicago more. I loved the Chicago I remembered more. And I didn't know anything about Loyola. So then, of course, you fast forward to George Floyd and the protests, and there was literally no conversation happening on campus. So I met with my academic council, and one of the faculty members brought it up themselves and said, are we going to say anything about what's happening out there in our streets? And I was just thinking, yes, finally, my people, you're here. I just have to amplify some of those voices. So I quickly reached out to the provost to give him a heads up, because faculty were talking about writing a letter and sending it to the president, calling her out for not making a statement, so on and so forth. So I just said, look, here's what's happening. A letter is coming. I know part of your job is to keep the president's desk clean. I just want you to get a heads up. And on top of that, not only are my faculty going to write a letter, but I'm also going to write a letter sharing my experiences at Loyola to this point in time. And let's be clear, I'm going to say all the things in my letter. And to his credit, he said, you seem passionate about it. My provost said, you seem passionate about it, so go for it. And I did. And, it was one of those things where, again, the culture of Loyola, I sent it to our communications team for feedback, and they dropped it like a hot potato. They're like, oh, well, it seems like something you may want to take up with the president. I don't want to get in between that. So I just asked my wife for feedback, and she graciously accepted, asked a former student, now professor, for feedback, both of them Black women, and they graciously accepted both of them and gave me feedback and edited it a bit, and I hit send. And the response has been phenomenal. I've heard from students, faculty, staff, alumni, people who've been at the university 40 plus years, and just folks who are just saying in no uncertain terms, thank you. someone finally is speaking truth to power. And I don't necessarily want to take full credit for that. So I'm quite sure that there are people who came before me who tried, and they were silenced by one means or another. But I am grateful for the opportunity to now build on that letter, because it's opened a lot of doors, and I'm excited about the future, but I'm also quite aware that there's a lot of work to do with the faculty and students and staff to get to that, to move in a positive direction. It's not going to be easy. And I can't even claim to have a concrete plan. I've got ideas, I've got thoughts, but my hope is that as a community, we'll come together and figure out how to finalize a plan and move forward.
Malik, I know that the folks at Loyola ended up circulating that, or the letter was the letter was circulated broadly. Is it something we could find on the internet and just attach in the chat?
Yeah, it's in. Let me. Oh, okay. Subtle hints. I hear you. It's like, can we find it? Can you find it?
Us. We'll Google it. We'll put it there.
I'm joking. Yeah.
Elizabeth might have beat us to it. I think that might be it, so that the students can have it if they wish.
Yeah, that's it. It's
okay.
On the front page of under diversity, equity, inclusion, on the front page of the School of Ed site. Yeah, they it was a risky move, I'd say, on my part, given where we are as a university, but it also felt like the right thing to do. And the fact of the matter is, it was risky, but not risky, because I don't necessarily feel like I have to be a dean. I never dreamed of this. I dreamed of getting to Chicago and doing good work, and the deanship is the way that I saw at the time to do that. So I'm slowly growing into the role, but this was never, some faculty starting from their first year in the assistant professor role want this. I never thought about this. I was very anti this. So in that sense, it wasn't a risk at all.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what's in the letter? How should we?
Yeah, let me click on it right with you. Maybe I can go. I haven't looked at this thing since I had said. Yeah, so I started off talking about, in the first paragraph, I wanted to talk about the fact of the moment, where we were in the moment, and just be as raw and as candid as I could. And also driving home the point that it's not just George Floyd. Like, this has been happening right around us for some time. It just so happens that oftentimes, if there's no video, it's as though those murders don't exist. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that out there. And then the second paragraph, I was intentional about citing it's state sanctioned, because people oftentimes will talk about, what about black on black crime and black on black violence, which is not a thing, by the way. So I just want to be very clear that it's state sanctioned violence. We're paying taxes, and this is what we're getting in exchange for the hard work that we're putting in society, and what we're getting in return. Let's see. Yeah, at the end, the academic, got to throw in some stats about similar educational backgrounds, and the fact that essentially the thought seemed at the time was, if you work hard, you can achieve. But then we have so much evidence out there that folks who are working hard are not achieving, and there's very clear documentation to support that notion. Third paragraph. Yeah, I just wanted to call out the school. This is where I said it's time to go in. So I talked about the things that I've seen and heard from students, faculty, and staff. And I made sure that I put we to drive home the point. I am Black, so I'm talking about us. It's not them. Again, trying to use the power of the position that I'm in. And again, all through this, when I say tired of laughing and tired of biting our tongues, I'm putting myself in there, because I felt like that. When you think back to the story I told about citing the white folks on the wall and being told, again, in no uncertain terms, that that's not what we do here, that was a challenge for me. And it wasn't up until this point. It wasn't until this point that I felt the power, so to speak, to talk on that, to speak on that in a public way. And In this one, and I think this is the paragraph, the next one, where I say I'm committed to leading an organization filled with members whose aspirations are to do more than just ensure survival. What I'm trying to do here is drive home the point that given who I am, given my identity, that I'm striving to be a different type of leader. One of the things that I came into that we're still in to some extent as Loyola, not just the School of Education, is an organization that's grounded in whiteness and white dominant norms, and it manifests in leadership and expectations of leadership in ways that are quite pronounced and other ways quite subtle. So, for example, when you think about the definition of a leader is the person who knows it all, has it figured out, and is going to lead us and out of this mess and so on and so forth. That would be a lie. I can't claim that. And I have no problem saying I don't know. I have some ideas. We can work on it together. That's very different from the way the culture has been created over time at Loyola. I don't like to think of this as a predominantly white institution. This is a traditionally white institution, and there are ramifications for that when you're a person of color trying to operate in such an organization that I wanted to highlight in that paragraph there. Here, the next two paragraphs, trying to end on a high note, just help people understand that despite everything that I've stated, and I really truly believe this, that I know that we can work together and get through this. There's a lot that we have to overcome. Obviously, we're 150 years old this year, so we didn't get here overnight, and we won't get out of it overnight. But as long as we're clear on identifying the issues are we have 20 Black faculty in total on this campus. 2 of them are full professors, and I'm one of those 2 full professors. We've got 21 or 22 Latinx faculty on this campus. That's inexcusable in a city like Chicago. We got here because we refuse to look at the policies and practices, those that are overt and those that are subtle, that led to this point. We got here because we don't have clearly articulated goals about what we're trying to do. Do we want to represent the population of the city of Chicago, of the US, of our peer institutions, of aspirational institutions? What are we trying to do? And those are the conversations that we're having right now. So despite everything that I've said, I do have hope because I'm seeing tangible changes as we're moving forward. I'm seeing that people are listening, and to his credit, our new provost, Roberto, has come in from Georgetown with new and different ideas, and he's really pushing us to think about what we're doing in very different ways.
Wow, thanks, Malik. There are a few questions I'm going to try and
okay.
I can narrate them to you if you wish.
Sure.
The first one just asked, why was, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, why at a Jesuit institution where presumably our reaction to these things, we should be able to pay attention to the mission of the institution and react to these things appropriately? Why was it not more clear? Why was it not easier for our institutions to respond to the George Floyd situation and everything beyond George Floyd?
Complicated.
Why weren't there 7 letters coming out, right? Why did it take, I guess, is one thing to think about.
Like, why wasn't there this outpouring of outrage and we're all in this together? That's just not the Loyola way, as far as I've seen. People talk about things in their silos and try to address them in those spaces, as opposed to coming together as a collective and making substantial change. And I feel like there's a reason for that. This is no accident. We look for complicated answers when the simple could probably get us a lot further. I don't know how many climate surveys I've seen, and the same data pops up over and over and over and over. We know what needs to be done. I think that we're also very much aware when you look at the data on white Catholics and how they vote, not to get too political, but I was somehow, I don't know why, but I was somehow surprised that many white Catholics were Trump supporters. And I think that that's something that we need to complicate in the space we're in, because this is a Catholic institution, obviously, is also traditionally white. Well, so what does that mean? Do they have folks of color in their interests? It's top of mind as we think about ways to improve our institution, because there are some people who love this space. In no uncertain term, they have nothing but good things to say about Loyola. And then you have folks of color who are the polar opposite. given their experiences. So I think that the system is operating exactly as it should. When you think about, if you even want to think about it in terms of economic terms, we don't have as much buying power in terms of giving back, and once our students are alumni. So is there any incentive to cater to the experiences of those students? If you look at it through that lens, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So all of that to say why more letters didn't go out, why it took being pushed by a faculty member to write a letter. I question myself about that even to this day. Why did it take that meeting? I know what I'm about. I know what I came here to do. I shouldn't have had to be prompted by a faculty in the middle of an academic council meeting. One thing that I'll never do is say that I'm perfect. And I have, like my letter says, I have no problem saying I'm sorry. My faculty get tired of hearing me say I'm sorry, but it's true. I am sorry. I should have been a better leader up until now. But I take great pride in the experiences that I gathered in my time on the West Coast and Silicon Valley in terms of placing small bets and trying to experiment and do things differently and learning from those mistakes, failing forward. And I'm going to continue to fail forward, understanding that I have my North Star, and that's to do right by all people, but my people of color in particular.
Thanks. I'm going to give you a couple more questions that showed up in the chat following that. So on your campus now, are there conversations about anti-racism, dismantling systemic racism? Are there conversations like that occurring?
Absolutely, and I do have some slides to share, Gary.
All right.
let me try to do that. You know, we talked about how I struggle with this, so okay, all right, from beginning. Do I have it?
Got it. You got it exactly where you want it.
All right. All right, it's only about 5 or 6. So we have, as a result of the letter, I went to my provost, obviously read it, and we had our one-on-one, and he said, you know, what's next? What are you trying to do? So I said that, you know, I'd like to create a center focused on anti-racism out of the School of Education. And one thing that I appreciate about him is that he keeps pushing me, and he said, you know, Malik, you're thinking too small. You're thinking too small. And I've never been told that I'm a small thinker ever. So it was a good and continues to be a great experience for me. So I took my proposal for the School of Ed anti-racism center and made it university-wide and took it to Dean's Council. We took a vote and it was 100% approved. So now it's becoming a thing, right? And we're actually moving from thinking of it long-term as just an institute and having it evolve into a formal school that's focused on race and justice in all fields, not just education, but across the entire campus. But along with that, we have 2 other initiatives. The other one is a cluster hire around looking for folks who are focused on race across different schools so we can have joint appointments across schools and some of those connections to the Institute. And we're also now embarked upon this anti-racism initiative. And here are the goals for the initiative. And this group is comprised of the provost, myself, a couple of other deans, a few folks in the provost office. So the Robin Mallett, who leads it, is over academic affairs. Badia Ahad is over faculty affairs. Our CDO, Chief Diversity Officer. So it's a lot of folks who are higher up. And there's also students involved, undergraduate, graduate, as well as others from around campus who are in student affairs. Here's our process moving forward. During the summer, we embarked on that first area of listening and reflection and anti-racism initiative. Those are the goals. That's the acronym ARI. Now we're in synthesis and thinking about recommendations. And the hope is in the spring, fall/spring, we'll get into execution and continue to stay in the assessment phase. So, and we're also looking at everything that we do. That's a slow burn given everything else on our plate, but we're instituting practices to look at our curriculum. Let's look at who we hire. How did we get to become so white as an institution? Let's really dig deeply into that as a question worthy of answering. And again, these goals have to be smart. Our students are really, really pushing us. And I should also mention that we're catching a lot of heat from our Black students, undergraduate and graduate. I think that almost every school on campus has gotten a list of demands, my school included. We've gotten demands sent to the president and the provost as well. So here's the plan moving forward again in academic affairs. And we're instituting this racial justice examen. That's a series of questions that each program on the campus will be charged with responding to try to get at exactly where they stand in this process of developing into a more racially just institution. That starts this fall, and then we'll collect that data and then move forward. And the examen has these as the different topics. So it's pretty comprehensive, as you can see. And quite frankly, you know, many of the things that are on this list, we probably don't have answers to, many of them, because we just haven't been thinking about it. It just has not been on the radar. And that's part of the point. It's not to embarrass anyone. It's to clearly identify problems and move swiftly to address them. So in terms of my own school, so after I wrote that letter this summer, it made its way into the hands of a funder who was giving me some funding for a different project. And when I called to talk about that project, she was essentially, you know, like, yeah, tell me more about this anti-racism. What are you trying to do there? So I painted a broad picture. So I don't really know where this is going to go, but I imagine developing a playbook of sorts that will help other schools understand the ups and downs associated with trying to do this work. So she wrote the check, and that was this summer. And now we're still stuck trying to figure out exactly how to spend it, because the issues that were present prior to my arrival are still here, right? So you're taking all of the unrest, the lack of trust, and you're sprinkling a little racism on top of there, and you're sprinkling a little bit of a global pandemic. It's a dangerous mix. But we're trying to move forward. And what I did last week was paint a picture of strategic priorities that I'd like for the School of Ed to embark upon. And I made sure that I expressed my personal values. And so, for example, up here at the top, you can see that I'm saying that we have to focus on our students of color and using their intersecting and analyzing their experiences using an intersectional lens. And I prioritize. Top priority are our students. And then I go in descending order into those who are least vulnerable in our space. Then next you have the strategic plan for the university. Those are the different areas, extraordinary academics and research and so on and so forth, that had to be encapsulated in anything that we do. Care for Our World, just so you know, is about sustainability. That's we have a new school for environmental sustainability, and the push is for all schools to be involved in that work in some capacity. Making it clear here that we're going to be inclusive, because oftentimes what you'll have in this work are the tenured faculty, particularly the full professors, who take up a lot of the air in the room. And I've been as guilty of anyone of doing that and trying to learn and grow and get better. Forward thinking, oftentimes in academia, we think about how things used to be. No, let's think about the future. Given this climate that we're in, given the fact that we're going to be staying home for the foreseeable future, how might the world be different, and how can we prepare for that different world? And obviously respectful, you know, oftentimes, again, when you have folks who have differing views and I'm the new person coming in trying to change things up, I just want to remind people that it's okay to disagree, but we should do so in a respectful way. Then next one, thinking about the fact that I need to drive home and be very clear that we're living in and working in a society and a school that's based on white dominant culture, and we really need to be clear about defining that. So when when it comes up, we can see it and call it out. So in terms of the extraordinary academics and research, what I did was come up, as you see in bold, with an idea of what we can be. We have a lot of programs, if not all of our programs are applied, but we just don't anchor on that. So just be clear about that. We need to develop an innovative idea, futuristic thinking, interdisciplinary. We have too many silos. One of the students, I forgot to mention, these demands here, and I didn't put the list in the beginning, I'm sorry, but they're sprinkled throughout, are what the students asked for. And there was a lot of language, but this is the summary of what they wanted. You know, they wanted more funding, specifically for Black students. And I take that on. That's a directive. That's my job, and I embrace that. increase diversity in faculty and course offerings. I can kind of do a little bit with the faculty hiring, incentivize things and ensure that we have a diverse slate of candidates. The course offerings, I'm helping them understand that, with academic council and shared governance, I don't have control over that, but they're understanding of that and we're working through it. Facilitate collaboration for Black student success. Essentially, we had, here's one specific example. I had a Black student who was in a program for 3 years and said that she didn't know that there was another Black student in her program. So we have instances, because we've been operating in such a colorblind fashion for so long, that there just was no intention around ensuring that people of color get to know one another. And these are programs that are top notch in terms of the research production and most of the traditional markers of success. But again, because they're walking through and they're operating through a colorblind lens, there were things that were missed. So we're addressing that. And we wouldn't have been able to address that if not for student demands. So you saw 6 and 7 too, was create transparency in institutional processes. So they were frustrated or are frustrated because, for example, some students are publishing and some students are not. How do these students get chosen and others not? Some students get funding and others do not. How does this happen? They want a peek behind the curtain to ensure that there are equitable processes in place. And that's clear. And I contend that the way that we can get there is creating departments. Some will push back and say that there are other ways to do that. And I understand that, I'm willing to listen, but we need to move to departments, in my opinion, because there's no layer of it. We need a stronger extension of the dean's office to make sure that students aren't falling through the cracks. And that's what's been happening for years, it seems. Care for the whole person. Let's see what's a new one here, 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, so they wanted to prioritize professional development, which goes back to this notion of some students are publishing and others aren't. Why is that? How can we ensure that everyone is progressing professionally? And the big one, demand 4, and probably the most complicated one, if I'm being honest, is ensuring faculty accountability. Because essentially what they're saying is, we got faculty who are talking to us all kinds of way in our classes, and we've been letting the people in power know, and nothing's been done. There's been no attempt to, and what I'm helping them understand is that this is a work in progress. We need to change our faculty handbook as a university. We need to change our bylaws as a school. But in their opinion, I have very little carrots and absolutely no stick. And to some extent, they're absolutely right. But we're working on it. As an academic council, we had a meeting right before this one, actually, where we talked about different committees that can be formed in ways that we can address some of the things that we all know are true. And demand 5 was support Black, Indigenous, and people of color students. It was just their attempt to acknowledge the fact that, yes, we're 9 Black students, but if we win, then all of us should win, all students of color should win. So that was their attempt to make sure that no one gets left behind, which I really appreciated. And when you look down in terms of faculty, what I wanted to do specifically is ensure that no one was missed. Because as part of a larger strategic plan, it's not all about addressing student needs. We have faculty who have needs as well, obviously. And what I didn't want to do was lump faculty all together. So I made sure that our clinical faculty, and some people call them non-tenure track, I don't like that term personally, but were separated so their needs can be clearly articulated, defined, and sent and come to me directly to address. And also thinking about the staff, and we need more. We have very limited numbers of staff in our school, given our size. We're about 50 faculty, close to 1,000 students. And up until last week, we had 4, essentially, full-time staff running the entire school. Now we have 2 additional folks for 180 days who are furloughed, but my hope is moving forward we'll be able to address what's been a long-standing issue, that is the lack of staff support in the School of Education. And student support. I'm wanting to push forward this notion of institutionalized annual reviews that flow up to the dean's office, so no one will be left behind. And again, if I see something, I will ask those questions. Lunch and learns to build community, and again, targeted fundraising. And they also talked about this notion of where we're positioning our field placements in Chicago. So right now, for example, in the teaching and learning program, our undergraduate program, we're largely based in Rogers Park, Edgewater, which is diverse in terms of its population. But the students are pushing back, okay, and saying, okay, what about the South and the West Side, which is where all the Black and brown folks are, and we're having to answer for that. You know, I have no problem doing that, going into those spaces. That's where I'm most comfortable, quite frankly. But again, with shared governance, it's a conversation. And some things that the students want, I can just make happen. I can make happen tomorrow. And other things like this, we have to be strategic because there's reasons why we may not go to certain schools that students may not necessarily understand. But we've already created an undergraduate task force focused on this work. We've developed a mission and a vision and some goals. I'm looking into bringing in some external experts to look at our curriculum. So the undergraduate work around this is moving faster than the graduate work, for a lot of different complicated reasons. But eventually, as a school, my hope is that we'll all get there, and I'm confident that we will. Global connection. Oh, I'm sorry. Global connections and partnerships. This is where I'm trying to see if did I miss any of their demands. No, I've hit them all. Yeah, and this is just, obviously, it speaks for itself. What I want to do is not just focus on global, but also the US. So what would it look like, for example, for us to go to, I should have put St. Louis on here. Sorry, Gary. What would it look like for us to go to St. Louis, take a class to St. Louis, and you come to Chicago, bring some of your students to Chicago. I have deep ties to New York, being that's where I was born and raised, in San Francisco, where I just came from. So now we have the coast taken care of. But what about the Midwest? There's a lot of work to be done right here as well. So moving forward, this is what I'm planning to post all of this in the longer form for the community to respond to online somewhere with comments for about 2 weeks. And then I'll take those and then we'll move forward in dialogue on exactly how things should flow in terms of a process. But in my mind, we have 6 groups, working groups that will focus on this. Some of these will be ad hoc committees that I'll create myself, but others are standing committees that should already be focused on some of this work. So for example, with organizational structure and accountability, I'm thinking that our standing committee that focuses on tenure and promotion, they should really think about what it looks like to reimagine annual reviews and tenure and promotion, taking in mind the fact that people of color oftentimes bear the burden that other faculty in the School of Education just don't. And that was perfectly clear in our meeting with the students who said, you know, I can't say that everyone here isn't necessarily meeting our needs. We do have folks who are meeting our needs. There's just not enough of them. And we need to spread some of that wealth. So, okay, how can I ensure that we have a long-standing commitment to this work? How can I work with faculty to understand that this is an issue that's worthy of being addressed right now? I have my thoughts, I have my ideas, but my hope is that some of the committees that are already in place will pick up this mantle and run with it. I'm sorry, I went way longer than I thought I would.
It's your show.
We only have 9 minutes. Right. Any other questions? I'm sorry.
There's a few questions in the chat, but only one brave soul brave enough to put up her virtual hand. So I'll go to the person from whom you can hear an actual voice, and then I'll talk about some of the other questions in the chat. Danielle Joy, would you like to?
Yes, hello, Dr.
Hi there.
Henfield. I'm Danielle Joy Davis, a faculty member here in the School of Education in higher education. Thank you for coming and welcome.
Glad to be here, virtually.
Yes, virtually. Thank you so much. Your presentation was awesome. You are a phenomenal leader. And one thing that I wanted to share earlier is that I don't think Loyola is unique in terms of their reaction to the Floyd event. You know, there was something similar going on in our space where it was like this deafening silence. Deafening silence for so long, you know, and, you know, some people say silence is violence, and I think it's particularly so for Black and brown people, you know, when we have trauma or crisis, and then our institutions that claim that we're all about social justice and equity say absolutely nothing. So I wanted to share that in terms of just you knowing that it's, I'm not sure that clearly Loyola was not alone in terms of Jesuit institutions that responded very slowly. And I want to commend you for your response. And also, very curious, it struck me when you said that there are 20 Black faculty members on your campus, and only 2 are full professors, one of which is you. And my question to you is, do you have any ideas or strategies or best practices that you've seen in terms of helping to even that out, specifically for Black faculty, given all of the issues that we deal with in terms of just everything, the way anti-Blackness plays out in higher education, and what that means in terms of moving from associate to full, that clearly is an issue on your campus as well. What are your ideas about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's one of those things where, you know, my experience at the University of Iowa served me well. I was the only Black male out of 100 faculty in
Wow.
the college at the time. So you can imagine students were just swarming my office. And what was, you know, the thing about it is that this reminds me of the meeting I had just before this, where a faculty member said, you know, this is all great work, but let's be mindful of the fact that the folks who are stepping up on this call right now are people of color yet again. Why can't we get faculty, white faculty, to be the ones who step into these spaces and take the lead and maybe consult with us, but we don't necessarily have to be the ones who lead this work. And I totally agree. And I thought it was a call out to white faculty that was warranted. But I also understand that you're not going to stop folks of color from doing this work. Some of them are going to continue to do that. And that's what I feel like the onus is on me. So for example, with the task force, the undergraduate task force is 2 women of color who are co-leading that. And I'm having to talk about, you know, course buyouts and stipends and that sort of thing. I don't know where I'm gonna get the money from, but I have to figure it out. Right, that's my job. I have to show me the money. I got to figure out where it is, and I will, because it's important. It's a top priority. But to your larger point about the lack of folks of color on the campus as a whole, what I'm finding interesting in my experience is that I have more. I keep relying on the word power. I'll just say it again. It seems more influence, positive influence, I'll say, on the campus as a whole, even more than my school, which is strangely enough. And we engaged in this dialogue literally just this weekend, because we have a new vice provost for faculty affairs. Want to call her out, Badia Ahad, Dr. Badia Ahad, who is phenomenal. And she's really pushing us to do cluster hires, and we're not going to accept any slates unless it's a diverse unless it's a diverse slate, and so on and so forth. But the dialogue that we're getting into is, you know, okay, so do women count when we say diversity? Does that count? And what about this? I have someone, he's white, but he's South African. Does that count? And I'm just like, you know what we're trying to do. Why are we playing this game? I don't understand. You know what we're going for. So it was, you know, one of those things where you type up an email and you don't hit send. You wait for the weekend to go over, open it up first thing on Monday, see how you feel. And I felt a little bit better. The blood pressure went down a little bit. And what I pushed for, and I think we're moving in this direction, is rather than move in a direction of diversity for diversity's sake, what are we trying to do? We're getting these letters from students who are saying that they don't see themselves in the classroom, they don't see themselves in the curriculum, and so on and so forth. Bringing additional folks of color to our community is part of the solution. And I know you know this, I preach to the choir now, right? I know it's part of the solution, but we also have to change how we do things internally, so that's not an issue for them once they get here. How can we focus on retention and recruitment? And we haven't had a goal. I said, can we at least settle on a goal? Do we want to, again, do we want to look like Chicago? Do we want to look like the US? Do we want to look like our peers, our aspirational folks? What are we trying to do? And I think that that was the start of a conversation that now we're at the point where folks are thinking about what does it look like to establish a diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan. So my long-winded answer to your question is that we need a plan. I'm tired of piecemealing things and, you know, let's bring an extra person over here. How are we going to support them? Or we'll figure that out later. No. We need a comprehensive plan before we focus on bringing people into our community, because all we'll do is more harm. And we have plenty of evidence to suggest that we know how to do that quite well, and it has to stop.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Malik, along those lines, one comment in the chat asked, would it be possible for us to get a copy of your presentation and perhaps consider some of your ideas in our own diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which has been stood up this fall and is beginning meeting now. I think I can guess your answer, but is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, look, we're part of the AJCU community. Dean Ritter, that's my partner right there. I mean, we're going to figure this all out together as, you know, mutual new-ish deans. I think you've got a year on me, but we're all trying to figure it out. And again, there's no playbook for this. And not to suggest that these issues weren't here before, but the conditions that we're in right now makes it even more difficult to address. So the only way we're going to get through this is together. So if you want to have me come out and speak with anyone, I love this stuff. I want to engage in this work because I'm constantly learning. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out. I always have my entire life. And the only way we're going to get through this again is together. So let's work together.
Well, whoever uses your plan needs to make sure that you are cited.
I would have done all that.
Where it came from, okay?
I appreciate that. Thank
Dr.
you very much.
Henfield.
Dr. Henfield, thank you. I was struck by one component which I'll share with you and others in the chat. It was so striking. We talked about this in our initial retreat this year. You mentioned the white Catholics who aren't standing up in a way you would like them to stand up. And there was a Sunday homily right on the verge of George Floyd by one of the priests here at SLU. And he quoted a Martin Luther King speech from 1967. And the exact quote was, "The great majority of Americans are suspended between two opposing attitudes. They are uneasy with justice, but unwilling to pay a significant price to eradicate it." And then he took that, of course, the priest took that quote from Martin Luther King in 1967, just moved it forward and said that the price is that white Americans would have to change. What's true in 1967 is true today. And he left somewhat pessimistic. I'm not quite convinced that we are willing to do what is necessary to change this. He said, it's problematic that white Americans are unwilling to change, but it is profoundly disturbing that we white Catholics are unwilling to pay the price, because our faith is rooted in the willingness to be disciples no matter the cost. And I just brought exactly to that quote from your comment earlier during this talk. I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us. There were a few questions that I'm sorry we could not get to in the chat. Please reach out to me. I'll forward your emails to Dr. Henfield. I'm sure he would.
I'm putting it in the chat as well.
And we'll keep this conversation going. Although I don't know, I see one last question from Freddie Willis. I wonder if it's short. I hate to cut anyone off who's willing to raise their virtual hand while we're here.
I'll make it very brief. I appreciate the conversation and the presentation. I was able to log in a little late. But your comment about planning is spot on, because these things, you know, a lot of times diversity is done, unfortunately, outside in. And I'm a big proponent of it being done inside out, because you have to prepare inside before you bring people into spaces and expect them to thrive. So, you know, I would challenge SLU to do some, you know, internal looking to prepare internally prior to bringing students in. But at the same time, though, there's an opportunity, I believe, when we talk about how do you do this, the opportunity is within the butts in the seats in our classrooms. You know, recruit from within, grow from within, and build those structures with the students that you already have there, because it's hard to get a student, a person to become a faculty and understand the nuances of moving through tenure and all of that once they're in that position. There needs to be more training while students are in the classroom and, recruiting of them so they can then walk that life and be confident about themselves when they get there.
I agree, and thanks for the comments. When I was at University of Iowa, we created something called a group called the Hubbard Group that was named after the first Black professor at the university, Philip Hubbard, at the University of Iowa. And part of that group was discussing the shadow curriculum, right? The things that you don't learn in the classroom. And it's a lot of it is exactly what you described, helping folks understand that you may graduate and be in these spaces where you're the only one or one of the few, and you see the work, the hard work that needs to be done, but understand that engaging in that work may not be rewarded by the system. So how are you going to make conscious decisions about the way that you navigate that system, and also disrupt at any chance that you can in a respectful way that can be heard? And some might say that that's Uncle Tom and that's shucking and jiving. We could have that conversation, right? But I would contend that it's more important to be heard than to focus on how you're projecting yourself and making sure that you're being. I want results. I want action. And whatever way it takes to do that, I'll take that hit. Whatever people want to say about me, at the end of the day, we're moving forward as a university, and I take great pride in being a small hand, playing a small role in that process. But we need more, and it can't just be folks of color. We need white folks to stand up. We need white Catholics to stand up, and we have to start using precise language. I think oftentimes we rely on diversity and equity. Nah, we talk about white folks, right? I mean, that's the majority on our campuses. This will not happen. We will not move forward unless they are part of this. So how can we get there? That's the conversation we need to have.
Malik, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming, spending time with us.
All right. You have a good one. All of you. Glad to be here.
Great day. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.